Part 1. Hook the Secret. In the Muintin Saudis, Howard Hughes was one of the richest and most powerful men on earth. He owned airlines. He controlled movie studios. He broke aviation records. His fortune was so vast that few people could even estimate its true size. And yet, despite having everything that money could buy, Howard Hughes spent the final years of his life alone. Locked away in dark hotel rooms, terrified of germs, surrounded by stacks of handwritten notes instead of friends. The world saw him as a billionaire genius. Hollywood saw him as a mysterious playboy who dated some of the most beautiful women of his generation. But behind the glamorous headlines was a man haunted by something far more powerful than money: fear, obsession, and an endless search for love and acceptance. Many people believe Howard Hughes was destroyed by mental illness. Others believe the real tragedy began long before that. Some historians argue that his desperate pursuit of love, combined with repeated heartbreak and betrayal, slowly pushed him deeper into isolation until he could no longer distinguish reality from his fears. How could a man who conquered Hollywood, aviation, and business lose control of his own life? And what secret transformed the world's richest bachelor into one of the most tragic figures in American history? To understand the answer, we must go back to the beginning. Part 2. Childhood and early struggles. Long before he became one of the richest men in history, Howard Hughes was simply a young boy growing up in Houston, Texas. He was born on December 24th, 1905, into a wealthy family. At first glance, his childhood appeared privileged and comfortable. His father, Howard Hughes Sr., had built a successful business by inventing a revolutionary drill bit used by the oil industry. But money could not protect young Howard from loss. From an early age, he struggled to connect with other children. He was shy, intensely curious, and often preferred machines to people. While other boys played games, Howard spent countless hours taking apart radios, bicycles, and mechanical devices just to understand how they worked. His obsession with perfection began early. Then tragedy struck. When Howard was only 14 years old, his mother died unexpectedly. The loss devastated him. She had been the person closest to him and the one who constantly worried about his health and safety. Many biographers believe her intense concern about illness may have influenced the fears that later dominated his life. Just 2 years later, another tragedy followed. His father died suddenly of a heart attack. At 17 years old, Howard Hughes found himself effectively orphaned. Most teenagers are worried about school, friendships, and their future. Howard was suddenly facing something entirely different: a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Relatives and business associates questioned whether such a young man could handle the responsibility. Some believed the family fortune would eventually disappear, but they underestimated him. Behind the quiet exterior was a fierce determination to prove himself. He briefly attended college, but quickly became bored. Traditional education felt too small for his ambitions. Howard believed he was destined for something bigger, something extraordinary. The death of his parents left a permanent scar that never fully healed. Yet it also ignited a relentless drive. He no longer wanted simply to be successful. He wanted to become the best, the richest, the most admired, the man nobody could ever ignore. What he didn't realize was that this hunger for achievement would eventually bring him everything he desired, except the one thing he seemed to need most: real human connection. Part 3. The Journey to Success. By the age of 18, Howard Hughes had already inherited a fortune that most people could never imagine. But wealth alone was not enough. He wanted power. He wanted recognition. Most of all, he wanted to prove that he was more than just a rich young heir living off his father's success. In the 1920s, Hughes made a decision that shocked many people around him. He moved to Hollywood. At the time, the film industry was exploding with opportunity, but it was also one of the riskiest businesses in America. Investors lost fortunes every year chasing movie dreams. Howard didn't care. He was fascinated by filmmaking. Unlike wealthy investors who simply financed projects, Hughes became obsessed with every detail. He spent enormous amounts of money perfecting scenes, rewriting scripts, and pushing technological boundaries. His perfectionism quickly became legendary. Then came his first major breakthrough. In 1930, he produced the war film Hell's Angels. The movie became one of the most expensive productions ever made at that time. Hughes spent years filming and repeatedly reshooting scenes because they did not meet his standards. Many critics predicted disaster. Instead, the film became a massive success. Overnight, Howard Hughes transformed from an unknown millionaire into one of Hollywood's most talked about figures. But movies were only the beginning. His true passion was flying. Ever since childhood, machines had fascinated him. Aircraft represented freedom, speed, and the possibility of achieving what others considered impossible. Hughes began designing and testing airplanes himself. Unlike many wealthy businessmen, he personally sat in the cockpit. He took the risks. He faced the danger. In 1935, he set a new airspeed record. 3 years later, he flew around the world in a record-breaking journey that captured international attention. The flight turned him into a national hero. Americans admired his courage. Newspapers celebrated his genius. The world now viewed Howard Hughes as something rare, a billionaire who didn't simply buy success, but actively chased it. His business empire expanded rapidly. He acquired controlling interests in major companies. He built Hughes Aircraft into one of the most important aviation firms in the United States. Government contracts brought in millions. His influence grew with every passing year. By the 1940s, Hughes was no longer just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful men in America. Yet behind the success, warning signs were beginning to appear. His obsession with perfection became increasingly extreme. He worked for days without rest. He demanded impossible standards from employees. Minor mistakes could trigger explosive reactions. Friends noticed that he seemed incapable of relaxing. Nothing was ever good enough. No achievement felt complete. Every victory simply led to a larger goal. The same relentless drive that built his empire was slowly becoming a prison. Still, nobody paid much attention. After all, Howard Hughes appeared to be living the ultimate dream. He was rich. He was famous. He was admired around the world. And soon Hollywood's most beautiful women would enter his life, creating a chapter far more complicated than any business deal or aviation record he had ever faced. The rise of Howard Hughes was only beginning, but so was the tragedy. Part 4. Peak of Fame and Private Life. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, Howard Hughes seemed to have achieved what millions of people only dreamed about. He possessed immense wealth. He commanded respect in business and aviation. And in Hollywood, he became one of the most desired men in America. Women were naturally drawn to him. He was handsome, mysterious, ambitious, and incredibly rich. Unlike many celebrities of his era, Hughes maintained an aura of secrecy that only made him more fascinating. Soon, his romantic life became almost as famous as his business empire. Over the years, he was linked to some of the most beautiful and celebrated actresses in Hollywood. Among them were Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Gene Tierney, Rita Hayworth, Lana Turner, and several others whose names regularly filled newspaper headlines. To the public, Howard Hughes appeared to be living a fairy tale. He had everything: money, power, fame, and the attention of women admired by millions around the world. Yet behind closed doors, his relationships were far more complicated. Perhaps the most significant romance of his life was with Katharine Hepburn. Unlike many women around him, Hepburn was fiercely independent and impossible to control. She challenged Hughes intellectually and emotionally. For a time, they seemed deeply connected. Friends believed she understood parts of Howard that few others could see. But even that relationship eventually collapsed. The breakup left emotional scars that neither publicly discussed in detail. Then came Ava Gardner. Their relationship was passionate, intense, and often turbulent. Gardner later described Hughes as charming, intelligent, and deeply complicated. He could be generous one moment and emotionally distant the next. The closer people tried to get to him, the more he seemed to retreat behind invisible walls. This pattern repeated itself again and again. Howard desperately wanted companionship, yet he struggled to trust people completely. He feared betrayal. He feared abandonment. Most of all, he feared losing control. As his fortune and influence grew, so did his obsession with managing every aspect of his life. He monitored relationships carefully. He became increasingly suspicious of people's motives. Was someone interested in him, or simply interested in his money and fame? The question haunted him. By the 1950s, Howard Hughes stood at the peak of his power. His companies were worth enormous sums. His name was known across the world. He could purchase almost anything he desired, but personal happiness remained frustratingly out of reach. The women who entered his life often encountered a man fighting battles that few could fully understand. Behind the confidence was insecurity. Behind the charm was loneliness. Behind the billionaire image was someone desperately searching for genuine connection. Ironically, the more successful Howard became, the more isolated he felt. His relationships never provided the stability he craved. Instead, each disappointment seemed to deepen the fears already growing inside him. What the world saw as the glamorous life of a billionaire playboy was slowly becoming something else. A warning sign. The beginning of a downward spiral that would eventually consume almost everything he had built. The empire was still standing, but the man behind it was starting to crumble. Part 5. The Tragedy and the Shocking Truth. Few people knew. From the outside, Howard Hughes still looked like a billionaire genius, but inside, a silent war was destroying him. The turning point had actually begun years earlier. In 1946, Hughes was involved in a devastating airplane crash while testing an experimental aircraft. The crash nearly killed him. He suffered severe injuries, including broken bones, internal damage, and chronic pain that would follow him for the rest of his life. Although he survived, he was never truly the same again. Doctors prescribed pain medication to help him cope. At the same time, the physical trauma intensified psychological struggles that had already been growing beneath the surface. His obsession with cleanliness became increasingly severe. His fear of germs expanded into a crippling condition. Today, many experts believe he suffered from severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, commonly known as OCD. What had once been unusual habits evolved into extreme rituals. Employees received detailed instructions on how to handle everyday objects. Simple interactions became complicated procedures. Entire rooms were organized according to rules that only Hughes fully understood. As the years passed, his fear of contamination became overwhelming. Then came the emotional wounds. Many of the relationships he had invested in eventually ended. Some women moved on. Others became frustrated with his controlling behavior and emotional distance. Each failed romance seemed to confirm his deepest fears. The more he longed for love, the more isolated he became. The more isolated he became, the harder it was for anyone to love him. It was a tragic cycle with no easy escape. By the 1960s, Howard Hughes had begun withdrawing from public life. He stopped giving interviews. He avoided photographs. Public appearances became extremely rare. Rumors spread everywhere. Some people claimed he was hiding from business rivals. Others believed he was secretly controlling vast corporate empires from behind the scenes. The truth was far sadder. Howard Hughes was increasingly becoming a prisoner of his own mind. He spent months inside darkened rooms. Curtains remained closed. Sunlight was often blocked out entirely. Stacks of paperwork surrounded him. Television screens played continuously. Communication with the outside world became limited. Even close associates struggled to reach him. As his isolation deepened, his physical health deteriorated. His appearance changed dramatically. The once charismatic billionaire who had captivated Hollywood transformed into a frail and withdrawn figure. Many employees and business partners rarely saw him in person. Decisions were passed through handwritten notes and intermediaries. The empire he had spent decades building continued operating, but its creator was disappearing. Ironically, Howard Hughes had achieved everything he once dreamed of. He had become one of the richest men alive. He had conquered Hollywood. He had broken aviation records. He had earned worldwide fame. Yet the thing he spent much of his life searching for remained elusive. Trust, connection, peace. The secret hinted at from the beginning was not that love alone destroyed Howard Hughes. It was that every heartbreak, every disappointment, and every fear fed the loneliness already growing inside him. Money could buy airplanes. Money could buy companies. Money could buy mansions and influence. But it could not silence the pain he carried for decades. And eventually, that pain became stronger than the empire itself. Part 6. His final years, legacy, and the lesson he left behind. By the 1970s, Howard Hughes had become one of the most mysterious figures on the planet. The man who once dominated headlines was now rarely seen. Stories about his condition spread across newspapers and television programs. Some were exaggerated. Others were painfully accurate. Few people truly knew how he was living. Hughes spent much of his final years moving between hotels and private residences, often remaining hidden from public view. His circle of trusted associates became smaller and smaller. The billionaire who once thrived on ambition and achievement now seemed disconnected from the world he had helped shape. His health continued to decline. Years of chronic pain, isolation, poor nutrition, and psychological struggles took a devastating toll on his body. When Howard Hughes died on April 5, 1976, at the age of 70, many people were shocked by reports describing how frail he had become. The contrast was heartbreaking. This was the same man who had once been celebrated as a daring pilot, the same man who had challenged Hollywood, the same man who had built a fortune that made him one of the wealthiest individuals of his era. Yet despite the tragic ending, Howard Hughes left behind an extraordinary legacy. His innovations helped transform aviation. His companies contributed to technological advancements that influenced generations. His impact on Hollywood remains part of film history. Decades after his death, books, documentaries, and movies continue exploring his fascinating life. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not found in business records or financial achievements. It is found in the lesson his story teaches. Howard Hughes spent much of his life chasing success, and he succeeded beyond what most people could ever imagine. He earned money, power, fame, and admiration. Yet those victories could not protect him from loneliness. They could not heal emotional wounds. They could not replace genuine human connection. The secret from the beginning of this story was never that a billionaire lost everything because of a single romance. The truth is far more complicated. Howard Hughes slowly lost himself while searching for control over things that can never be fully controlled: love, trust, fear, and human relationships. His life reminds us that success and happiness are not always the same thing. A person can own an empire and still feel alone. A person can be admired by millions and still struggle to be understood. Maybe the world fell in love with the legend of Howard Hughes, the billionaire, the aviator, the Hollywood playboy, but very few people ever truly knew the man behind those titles. And perhaps that was the greatest tragedy of all. After hearing Howard Hughes' story, do you think his downfall was caused more by his mental struggles or by the loneliness that followed him throughout life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.